This is a response to a couple of videos by Pax Gorilla and by Pyro314 in relation to my video about the function of beauty, where I wouldn't say citing, but leaning against evolutionary psychology as one of the ways of accounting for the experience of beauty and understanding it. Fascinating stuff, thanks for those responses, I enjoyed them both. I just want to preface this, actually, it's partly in relation to yours, particularly there, Pax Gorilla, which is about two things, anthropocentrism and misogyny. I mean, I'm really glad you brought up anthropocentrism, because I think that's really important. But I'm also kind of aware that that some of my videos recently have been really misogynistic. I'm laughing because I'm slightly nervous about it. But and that was an example of that, you know. I was talking about fucking women's brains out in that. And in other videos I've talked about eyes being drawn to breasts. You know, I'm kind of aware that I'm walking through that territory right now. And it is definitely quite misogynistic. And objectification of women, I think, or women's bodies, I think, is the phrase you use, Pax Gorilla. Yeah, and I'm aware I'm doing that. It is interesting. It is interesting to me, and I know it might be troubling. I don't know. I don't know if that's what you meant when you said that you wouldn't willingly go on a walk with me unless we're surrounded by 3,000 miles of ocean. I mean, that's absolutely fine. I'm not offended in any way by that. But you know, I'm not sure if that's what you were leaning on, or whether it was some of the other videos I've made which question my sanity. And I can understand that. Yeah, I'm definitely walking through some territory which is not brightly lit right now. It is dappled with shade and some darkness, and some of that darkness is definitely to do with misogyny and objectification, and yeah, it's just some of the, I don't want to keep repeating the same word, but yeah, definitely some of the darker aspects of male-female relationships, male-male relationships, power relationships between individuals, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm just trying not to shy away from these things, you know. That's my aim, really. I'm just trying to put my foot down wherever the momentum of my previous steps have led me, and I completely concur. It is leading me to some pretty weird places, and will continue to. I've made a couple of videos which I haven't posted yet because I think they'll get flagged, but I will find a way to post them. You know, which, yeah, again, are steps in directions which I hadn't really anticipated, but I don't want to shy away from taking steps in difficult directions. So, yeah, I guess this is just me acknowledging that some of the things I'm saying and doing in some of these videos either portray me as an asshole or demonstrate that I am an asshole, and that's kind of fine. So be it, you know. Anyway, yeah, evolutionary psychology, let's move on to that. I want to try and loop back to anthropocentrism as opposed to misogyny at the end, because I think that is quite important. But yeah, but EvoPsych, I mean, I don't have an awful lot of faith in a lot of EvoPsych, I have to say, although I do enjoy reading it. And I enjoy reading it, I think, for a lot of the same reasons that I enjoy reading certain kinds of speculative fiction. There's something very comforting about EvoPsych, and something very complete about it, you know. It portrays the world in a very holistic way, doesn't it, evolutionary psychology, you know. Any part of the world, and particularly the world of the human psyche, which is the real undiscovered country, isn't it? Any part of the world can kind of be explained in EvoPsych terms if you try hard enough. And it has something of the appeal of a game, or as I say, a piece of speculative fiction in that regard. That you know, you want to explain a piece of human behaviour that otherwise looks really strange, like beauty or something like it. Then yeah, there's ways of unpacking or creating a version of history, evolutionary history, which gives an account for that. So it ties the whole world up in a neat bow, which is quite comforting, I think, sometimes. And it represents a kind of exquisite solving of a problem in some ways. Anyhow, so that's the attraction for me, but I am aware of the limitations. Yeah, of course, it is re-engineering the present in terms of a past which is gone and which you can't recover, and which you can't produce falsifiable hypotheses about. All those problems are absolutely true. You know, it is the construction of just so stories, a lot of it. And I think we're all aware of that, at least I am. It doesn't stop me indulging in it, and I do definitely feel these things are indulgences in some way, but I am kind of aware of that. And those reverse engineering things are just full of pitfalls. I was trying to think of an analogy for it, and I guess the analogy I came up with was, it's a lot of it is a bit like trying to explain a function in a program like Microsoft Office in terms of an evolutionary history. So an alien comes to the planet and opens up Microsoft Office, and there's Microsoft Word. He says, it's got this function where you can change the font. I can go from Comic Sans to Verdana and then to Arial Bold. That's interesting. I wonder where that function came from. Let's look back through the history of computing to find that. And then they start with the Babbage difference engine and try to explain the font change feature in Microsoft Word in terms of Babbage's difference engine, or in terms of the Jacquard loom, or in terms of the abacus, or in terms of people moving stones or making marks on a cave wall. There's a point where it just becomes ridiculous because you're working in the wrong scale, you're working with the wrong feature set, you're just working outside of the categories that are meaningful. It doesn't say it's not interesting, and I think if someone tried that to explain, the font change feature in terms of the abacus, it'd be fascinating. I would love to read it, but it's a just so story, isn't it? And I think EvoPsych a lot of the time does that. And I think something like beauty isn't a good example personally. Beauty is a really, really complex idea. Some of those things have come from the comments. There's a lot been written about beauty, isn't it, in some of the discourses I've already mentioned. But one thing is very, very clear is that it's really complex. It's got lots of different features, lots of subjectivity attached to it, or lots of subjective elements, even though it might have a universal core. Lots of influence on it by things like education, culture, language, consciousness, the accidents of history. All these things can change our understanding of what beauty is. It's a really fuzzy set or a radial category which is hard to pin down. So any kind of singular unifying explanation of beauty is doomed to failure, and particularly something like EvoPsych. If you look into EvoPsych for a totalizing explanation of beauty, you're just never going to get there, I don't think. Which isn't to say, for me at least, it's not interesting spending some time kicking that around, which is what I'm trying to do really. So what is the function of EvoPsych? Okay, let me just think about that, because I do want to raise a small flag for evolutionary psychology in some way, but in a limited way, not in a way that allows it to construct those highly wrought, just so stories about really complex, radial, fuzzy sets of things like beauty, or any of the other stuff I've been talking about. Sorry, just looking at this canal boat I'm walking past, really interesting one. So for sure, whatever psyche is, whatever psychology talks about, it's something to do with the brain, isn't it? It's something to do with the brain. The brain is evolved, it's an evolved organ that allows us to form patterns out of experience, and allows us to pick out experiences and award salience to them, and allows us to control behaviour in relation to salient experiences, and allows us to manipulate those patterns, and subsequently in our brains at least allows us to send those patterns to be processed in a more formal, abstract way that allows us to mobilise the patterns of one thing to the patterns of another through things like metaphor and figurative language and all that kind of stuff. So we're, we are the product. We are at least significantly the result of our brains, and our brains, are undoubtedly, as I say, evolved organs. So somewhere in there is an abacus, there is a Jacquard loom in there that is, or maybe even a difference engine that is the result of evolutionary processes. But what kind of differences that engine is finding, what kind of patterns that loom is weaving, and what kind of sums that abacus is doing, is not, is not reducible to the mechanics of the machine. You don't find the differences that the difference engine is working out by taking apart the difference engine. Does that make sense? I don't know, I hope it does make sense. But you can, but there is some things in there which are interesting. I do think a lot of the metaphors, I know I've talked about metaphors a lot recently, I do think a lot of the metaphors that we deploy to understand the most abstract ideas, like beauty, are drawn from patterns that are in the blueprints of the Jacquard loom, you know, that are in the machinery of the difference engine. You know, I think we can look to evolutionary psychology to provide, if not the answers to the problems of what a psyche is and what a psyche is doing, I think we can look to it to provide some of the blueprints or some of the tools, let me put it that way, that the psyche is using to formulate answers to the problems. You know, we can't look to the Jacquard loom to explain beauty. We can't look to evolutionary history to explain something as complex as beauty. But I think we can look there to find the locations of some of the basic components that we subsequently use to generate this thing called beauty, or something like it, and generate the differences in beauty that we experience. I guess that brings me to two things: Gestalt and Anthropocentrism. Anthropocentrism, I do think, is important in this one, not because I'm making a big claim for human supremacy or anything like that, but simply because I think it's important to know who we are. And we are anthropos, aren't we? We are anthropos. I'm an anthrop. And I've got an anthrop's body, and I've got the brains of an anthrop, albeit one that's weaving its own kind of patterns now. So I think it is good to start with what it is to be human in its most animal sense, because as I say, that's where a lot of the tools, I think, come from, and or the basic machinery that generates the complex patterns that humans can produce. I think you have to look to the body of the human in many ways, and the functioning of the human in many ways, and our human ancestors, to explain what the tools are that we are trying to wield, you know, to make sure we don't hurt each other by wielding them stupidly, apart from anything else. And then this Gestalt thing, yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Piro. Yeah, I do think a lot of these things are Gestalts, and a lot of feeling stuff is Gestalt, particularly. You know, we tend to feel patterns and see detail, at least that's kind of my experience, you know. We get a feeling about things when there's a pattern lurking, and then when we focus on the detail, no, I'm not making myself sensible here. I'll give you a little analogy. I was walking a couple of days ago, and I shot a video about this actually, and I kind of felt something as I took a step, and then I realised I'd seen something on the ground, a four-leaf clover. Stepped back, and there was a four-leaf clover. So I'd seen a pattern, you know, or I hadn't seen it because I hadn't consciously seen it until I got the feeling of it. But the pattern, the Gestalt of that, and the Gestalt which included the difference between that object and the object around it, all of which had three leaves, there was something about that pattern which I felt as a kind of recognition, not exactly an alarm, because it wasn't alarming, but it was definitely a felt response, which subsequently resolved into a memory and then into a perception. And by the time I perceived it as a four-leaf clover, the feeling had gone. So yeah, and I think beauty is something like that. I mean, it's a much more complex thing. It's much more oscillates between looking and feeling, and it's much more interwoven. You know, looking at something, you can look at something and oh, I don't know. But I think I know what you mean. It is about a Gestalt, and it is about a Gestalt not just of patterns in the way I've talked about, but Gestalts in terms of brain functioning, in terms of the workings of that old Jacquard loom and the difference engine, making differences, and then making differences that make a difference, and then finding patterns in the differences that make differences, and presenting stuff to us as a seamless world, you know, comparatively seamless garment. I think I've talked for too long. I'll just show you this tree, because I love this tree. I think that's a beautiful tree, even though it's really dead. Sometimes I come down here and there are crows on this tree, and it's a perfect tree for crows to be on. They don't nest there, obviously, because there's no foliage. But there's something about a dark crow on those bleached branches against the sky, particularly a sky like this, which is just stunning. And it's not about the crow or the tree or the sky, or indeed the field behind it. It's just about the whole damn thing, you know. Look at the way they're weaving in and out of each other, those branches. Yeah, it's anthropocentric for sure.